The Legend of Zelda didn't just create a franchise, it created a design philosophy that every action-adventure game still copies to this day. The idea that your gear is your power, that picking up a new item fundamentally changes what the world lets you do. Today, I'm breaking down every single ability across the entire Zelda series and everything that makes them work, starting with the games that invented the formula. Here's something nobody appreciates enough about the original Legend of Zelda. There was no ability screen, there was no skill tree, there were no unlockable perks. Your powers came from what you carried, and what you carried changed everything. The boomerang could stun enemies and retrieve distant objects. Bombs blew open walls that looked completely solid, revealing entire hidden rooms. The stepladder let you cross single-tile gaps that would otherwise block your path forever. The raft took you to islands you couldn't even see from the mainland. Every single item wasn't just a tool, it was a key to a part of the world that didn't exist for you before. And then A Link to the Past took that concept and formalized it into something brilliant. IGN explicitly labels certain items in that game as ability items, and for good reason. Pegasus boots let Link dash. The Power Glove let him lift heavy objects. Flippers unlocked swimming entirely. The Moon Pearl prevented Link from transforming in the Dark World. The Titan's Mitt upgraded the Power Glove so he could lift even heavier objects. These weren't just inventory pickups. They were permanent upgrades to what Link could physically do. But here's where it gets interesting. Go back to the original game and look at the blue ring. It halves all incoming damage, and you can just buy it from a shop. That's one of the earliest examples of a purchasable, passive ability upgrade in gaming history. You're literally buying a permanent stat change from a vendor in 1986. Then there's the magical key. It works on every single locked door in the late dungeons, permanently. It takes what was a resource management problem, counting your keys, rationing them carefully, and replaces it with a flat ability. That design philosophy, turning limited resources into permanent powers, is something the series would come back to over and over again. Every modern Zelda ability system, from runes to ancient powers, is a refinement of this original idea. Items and abilities were never separate things. They were always the same. And the sophistication of these early systems is genuinely surprising when you go back and look at them closely. But the real magic started when those items moved out of the inventory and into the dungeons themselves. The Dungeon Toolkit. If Zelda has a native language, these 4 tools are the alphabet. The boomerang, bombs, the bow, and the hookshot. They show up in nearly every mainline title, and every single one of them is doing way more work than you think. Let me explain. The boomerang looks like a simple stun tool. Throw it, hit an enemy, they freeze for a second, you move in for the kill. But here's the thing, in many Zelda titles, the boomerang is the only way to safely engage certain enemy types without taking damage. It retrieves distant items, it triggers switches you can't physically reach, and it lets you control the pace of a fight before it even starts. It's not just a weapon, it's crowd control, item retrieval, and puzzle solving wrapped into one throwable stick. Bombs are even sneakier in terms of design. Sure, they blow things up. Everybody knows that, but what bombs actually do is train you to distrust walls. Every cracked surface, every suspicious floor tile, every oddly placed rock formation in the entire series exists because bombs taught you to question your environment. You stop seeing a room as a room, you start seeing it as a collection of things that might be hiding something behind them. That's not just an explosive, that's a complete rewiring of how you read level design. Then there's the hookshot, and this is where it gets really interesting. The hookshot attaches to wooden objects, including trees and treasure chests, and pulls Link directly to them. In Majora's Mask, it's how you reach loft spaces, grab skulltulas tucked into corners, and access chests that are completely inaccessible by any other means. Most people call it a grappling hook. It's not. It's a spatial rewrite. The moment you get the hookshot, across the room stops meaning what it used to mean. Every wooden surface becomes a potential destination. Every gap becomes optional. It doesn't just let you cross space. It fundamentally changes what space means in a dungeon. And finally, the bow. Simple concept, right? Point, shoot, done. But the bow scales harder than almost any other tool in the franchise. In Breath of the Wild alone, bow damage ranges from 4 with a basic wooden bow all the way up to 50 with a Royal Guard's bow. Stack elemental arrows on top of that. Fire, ice, shock, bomb, each adding fixed bonus damage, and suddenly, you're not holding a ranged weapon anymore. You're holding an entire elemental toolkit that can freeze enemies, ignite grass fields, trigger electrical chain reactions, or just blow something up from 100 yards away. 4 tools. All of them sound simple enough to explain in a single sentence, but every one of them restructures how you move through, fight in, and think about dungeon space. They're the grammar of the entire series. But if you think dungeon tools are impressive, wait until you see what happens when Link puts down the items and starts fighting with his bare hands and raw technique. How Link fights. Before we talk about any magic or ancient technology, we need to talk about something most people take completely for granted. Link's combat abilities, not his items, not his tools, the actual techniques he performs with his body and his sword, because one of them literally changed the gaming industry forever. Let me explain. In 1998, Ocarina of Time introduced Z-targeting. You press a button, the camera locks onto an enemy, and Link's entire orientation snaps to face that target. Sounds simple, but before this existed, 3D action combat was a mess. Players were fighting the camera more than they were fighting enemies. Z-targeting fixed that overnight. Every 3D action game that uses a lock-on system today owes something to Ocarina of Time. Dark Souls, Devil May Cry, God of War, all of them trace back to this one mechanic, and Nintendo just casually dropped it as a feature in a Zelda game. But targeting is only half the equation. The other half is what you actually do once you're locked on. The spin attack is the signature offensive move of the entire series. Link charges his sword and unleashes a circular sweep that hits every enemy around him simultaneously. It shows up in Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker HD, Skyward Sword, Spirit Tracks, and more. Most players treat it as a simple crowd control move. Hold the button, spin, done. But here's where it gets interesting. The spin attack is not a flat damage ability. In Ocarina of Time, the Master Sword Quick Spin deals 2 damage per spin. A full magic charge spin with the exact same sword deals 4. Same animation, doubled output. Speedrunners have documented these numbers extensively because knowing exactly when to use a quick spin versus a charge spin is the difference between a clean boss kill and a reset. And Nintendo clearly treats the spin attack as a scalable system. Wind Waker HD literally introduces a name upgrade called the Great Spin Attack, an enhanced version with greater range and damage. That's a progression mechanic built on top of a move that's been in the series for decades. Beyond the spin attack, Link's toolkit includes the jump slash for vertical distance closing and heavy impact damage, and the thrust for extending his range in a straight line. Then there's the parry system. Wind Waker HD and Skyward Sword both introduce timing-based defensive mechanics, where a successful parry opens a counterattack window. Miss the timing, you eat damage. Nail it, and the enemy is completely exposed. It turns combat into something almost rhythmic, rewarding precision over button mashing. Here's the thing, every single one of these techniques is something Link does with his own body. No rune, no ancient artifact, no Sheikah slate, just a sword, a shield, and decades of refined combat design. But if you think physical combat covers everything Link can do, wait until you hear what happens when he picks up an instrument, songs, and masks. Most Zelda abilities ask you to solve a problem. The Sun Song asks you to solve a feeling. Here's what I mean. You're walking through the royal family's tomb in Ocarina of Time, and Redeads are everywhere. These things don't just attack you. They scream, they freeze Link in place, and then they latch onto him. For a lot of players, especially younger ones, Redeads were genuinely terrifying. They still are, but then you learn 6 notes on the ocarina, and everything changes. The Sun Song doesn't just advance time from day to night or night to day. It completely freezes Redeads and Gibdos in place. They just stop. One melody turns the most horrifying enemy encounter in the game into a non-issue. And that's not just clever game design. It's one of the only abilities in the entire franchise that solves a puzzle problem and an emotional problem at the same time. You're not just bypassing an obstacle, you're defeating fear itself with music. That's a fundamentally different relationship between the player and an ability than anything a sword or bomb can offer. But if the Sun Song was experimental, Majora's Mask went completely off the deep end. The transformation masks in Majora's Mask aren't cosmetic changes. Each one is a complete alternate moveset crammed into a single equipable item. The Deku Mask turns Link into a Deku Scrub with spinning flower pad flight and bubble projectiles. The Goron Mask gives him high-speed rolling traversal and devastating punch attacks. The Zora Mask enables full underwater swimming and an electrical shield that damages anything nearby. Every single mask fundamentally changes how you move, fight, and interact with the world. You're not playing as Link with a different skin. You're playing a different character. Eiji Aonuma confirmed this was entirely intentional. Each mask was designed to give Link a distinct storyline and ability set, not just a visual swap. The Goron sections feel different from the Zora sections because they literally are different games sharing the same world. Nobody had attempted anything like this in an action-adventure title before, and honestly, very few have since. But the real payoff is the Fierce Deity mask. This thing is only usable during boss fights, and getting it requires completing every single mask side quest in the game. Every single one. That means tracking down dozens of masks, finishing some of the most obscure and emotionally gut-wrenching quests in Zelda history, and proving you've mastered the entire system. Your reward? Link transforms into an adult warrior form, wielding a double helix sword that fires beam attacks. It is the most powerful single ability in Majora's Mask, and it absolutely destroys bosses that previously took careful strategy and pattern recognition. The Fierce Deity doesn't fight bosses, it erases them. Here's the thing about this entire era. Songs and masks are the most un-Zelda abilities the series has has ever produced. There are no dungeon items here, no hookshots, no boomerangs, no bombs strapped to arrows. You're playing music and literally becoming other people. The design risk was enormous, and it produced two of the most beloved games in the franchise because these abilities weren't just mechanically useful, they were emotionally resonant. The Sun's song made you feel safe. The transformation mass made you feel like someone else entirely. The fierce deity made you feel like a god. That kind of emotional design is rare in any game, let alone a Nintendo franchise from 2000. But if songs and masks represent the most creative abilities Zelda ever produced, the Sheikah Slate represents the most systematic, the Sheikah Slate. Every Zelda game before Breath of the Wild followed the same formula. You enter a dungeon, you find a new tool, you use that tool to beat the dungeon, and then you barely touch it again until one random puzzle 3 dungeons later. The hookshot, the iron boots, the spinner. One dungeon, one purpose, move on. Breath of the Wild threw all of that out. Instead of giving you a dozen situational tools spread across dozens of hours, it gave you 4, just 4. Remote bombs, magnesis, stasis, and cryonis. You get all of them within the first hour on the Great Plateau, and those 4 abilities carry the entire experience. Every shrine, every puzzle, every combat encounter for the next 100 plus hours. That's a complete inversion of how Zelda had worked for over 2 decades. Remote bombs are the most familiar. Bombs have been in Zelda since 1986, but these come in 2 types, spherical and cubic. The sphere rolls with terrain, the cube stays exactly where you place it. Need a bomb to hold position on a moving platform? Cube. Need one to roll into a narrow gap? Sphere. Both detonate on command and recharge on a short cooldown instead of consuming inventory. No more hoarding. No more running out at the worst possible moment. Magnesis is where the physics sandbox really opens up. It lets Link grab and move any metal object in the environment. Platforms, doors, treasure chests, weapons, enemy shields. The game never explicitly tells you to pick up a massive metal slab and drop it on a Bokoblin's head from 30 feet up, but the physics engine lets you do it. And the first time you figure that out on your own, it clicks. That's the whole design philosophy of Breath of the Wild in one interaction. But stasis is the real star. On the surface, it sounds straightforward. Freeze an object in time. Here's where it gets interesting. While that object is frozen, every hit you land stores kinetic energy. Swing a sword at a frozen boulder 5 times, and when stasis ends, all that energy releases at once, launching it in whatever direction you were hitting. You're not just freezing things to get them out of the way. You're calculating angles, stacking hits, and engineering launches. Players figured out you could send boulders flying across entire valleys, launch yourself on rafts, and catapult enemies off cliffs. Easily the most satisfying rune once you understand it. Cryonis rounds out the core 4. Point it at any water surface and it generates an ice pillar, instantly creating a platform where there wasn't one. Rivers, lakes, waterfalls, even shallow puddles. Anywhere there's water, you have vertical traversal. Beyond the core 4, the Sheikah Slate also houses the camera rune and the amiibo rune. The camera documents creatures, weapons, and materials for a Hyrule compendium, turning exploration into a collection mechanic. The amiibo rune lets you scan physical figures to summon items into the game, real-world collectibles functioning as in-game ability triggers. Pay to loot, basically, but Nintendo made it feel charming instead of predatory. Here's the thing that makes all of this matter. Previous Zelda games gave you a new ability for each dungeon. Breath of the Wild gave you 4 abilities at the start and built 120 shrines around them. Nintendo didn't give players more tools. They gave players fewer tools and trusted those tools to carry everything. But if the Sheikah Slate redefined what Zelda abilities could be, the sequel took that foundation and rebuilt it from scratch. And honestly, it might have gone even further. Spin-offs and genre shifts. Here's something nobody really talks about when it comes to Zelda abilities. They don't just work in Zelda games. They work in basically every genre you can throw them into. And that's not an accident. It's proof that the core ability vocabulary Nintendo built over decades is so fundamentally solid that you can rip it out of an action-adventure game, drop it into a completely different genre, and it still functions. It just means something different. Let's start with Hyrule Warriors. Take Zelda's combat, strip out the puzzles, and throw Link into a Musou framework where he's fighting thousands of enemies at once. 1 vs. thousands combat needs tools that mainline Zelda never had to consider. So Hyrule Warriors introduces Focus Spirit, a powered-up state that ramps your attack output for a limited window. There's Fairy Magic, which unleashes devastating area attacks across the battlefield, and Captain Power strengthens nearby allied units. None of these exist in a single mainline Zelda title, but the Musou genre demanded them, and the Zelda framework was flexible enough to accommodate them without feeling wrong. Age of Calamity pulls directly from Breath of the Wild. Cryonis makes the jump. Flurry Rush makes the jump. But the Musou format also requires Perfect Guard, a frame-precise block that counters incoming attacks, and a dedicated countering system that mainline BOTW never needed. Some abilities translate directly, others need genre-specific additions. The interesting part is that both types feel like they belong. But here's where it gets genuinely weird. Cadence of Hyrule. This is the game that proves Zelda's ability design can survive anything. Merge the entire mirrors Zelda philosophy with Crypt of the Necrodancer, a rhythm roguelike where every single action happens on the beat of the music. Every single one. Burrow lets you move underground to avoid enemies, but only if you activate it in rhythm. Deku Spit fires a projectile, but you're launching it to the tempo of the soundtrack. Haste increases movement speed, which in a rhythm game means you're operating on a tighter timing window, and Fireball doesn't fire at all if you miss the beat. Think about what that means. In mainline Zelda, you press a button and the ability activates. In Cadence of Hyrule, every ability becomes a rhythm input first and a Zelda ability second. The abilities themselves are recognizable: projectiles, traversal tools, movement buffs, but the rhythm constraint transforms what it feels like to use them. You're not just solving a puzzle, you're performing. And then there's Triforce Heroes, which changes who can use abilities. The totem mechanic stacks 3 links vertically to reach elevated platforms. Dash attack covers ground as a coordinated team move. Great spin requires all 3 players to execute. Remove 1 player and the ability breaks. That's a fundamentally different design philosophy than anything in mainline Zelda, where Link is always alone. Here's the pattern across all of these spin-offs. Zelda's core ability vocabulary stays consistent, but the genre forces those abilities to mean something completely different. A projectile in a Mewtwo game is crowd control. A projectile in a rhythm game is a time performance. A traversal tool in co-op is a trust exercise. The fact that Zelda's abilities can absorb all of these reinterpretations without losing their identity is genuinely impressive design work. But if spin-offs show how flexible Zelda abilities are when you change the genre, the next section shows what happens when you zoom out and look at how these abilities connect across the entire franchise, because some of the most interesting details are hiding in the margins. Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild gave you physics tools. Tears of the Kingdom gave you physics authorship, and that distinction changes everything about what a Zelda ability even is. Here's the thing. The 4 ancient powers in Tears of the Kingdom aren't really abilities in the traditional sense. They're not keys designed for specific locks. They're not tools that solve one type of puzzle. They are entire systems, each one a design philosophy, disguised as a button press, and together, they represent the most radical reimagining of player agency the series has ever attempted. Let's start with the big one. Ultra Hand lets Link pick up, move, and adhesively bond almost any object in the game world to any other object. Logs, fans, rockets, wheels, sleds, minecarts, stone slabs. You grab them, you rotate them, you glue them together, and suddenly you have a functional vehicle, or a bridge, or a weapons platform, or a flying machine held together by 3 fans and a prayer. Ultra Hand is not a tool, it is a construction engine. The entire overworld, every sky island, every shrine, every surface level puzzle in Tears of the Kingdom is designed around the assumption that players will build their way through it. That's not an ability, that's a language. Then there's Fuse, and this one deserves special attention because of what it fixes. Breath of the Wild's weapon degradation system was one of the most divisive mechanics in modern gaming. Weapons broke constantly, and players hated losing good gear. Fuse takes that exact system and recontextualizes it completely. Now you combine weapons with materials found in the environment to alter their damage, range, and elemental properties. A stick fused with a rock becomes a hammer. A shield fused with a rocket launches you into the sky. A sword fused with a key's eyeball literally tracks enemies when you throw it. Weapon degradation stops being a frustration and starts being a creative resource. You're not losing weapons anymore. You're experimenting with them. That's brilliant design, and it retroactively makes Breath of the Wild's most criticized mechanic feel like a rough draft for something genuinely innovative. Ascend sounds simple. Link passes upward through solid ceilings and cave roofs, reappearing on the surface above. That's it, one sentence. But the implication is staggering. No ceiling in the entire game is a barrier. Every cave, every dungeon room, every mountain with an overhang is now a potential shortcut. You're standing inside a cave and you just go up, through the rock, through the geometry, through what every other game in history told you was a wall. Ascend fundamentally changes what exploration means in a 3D open world, because it removes the concept of dead ends from vertical space entirely. The simplest ability in the game has the biggest consequences. Recall reverses time for a single object, sending it back along its recent path. A falling boulder becomes a rising platform. A launched projectile returns to its source. A piece of debris falling from a sky island becomes your elevator back up to it. If stasis was about storing energy and releasing it forward, recall is its philosophical successor, moving in the opposite direction. Where stasis asked what happens next, recall asks where did this come from. It turns the recent past of every object into a usable mechanic. And then there's auto build, which bridges the gap between creativity and practicality. It reconstructs recent Ultra Hand creations, instantly using available materials, or Zonite. That vehicle you spent 4 minutes carefully assembling, now it's a 1-button recall away. Auto build turns one-off experiments into repeatable tools, which means players who discover effective designs can deploy them consistently. It rewards creative problem solving by making your best ideas permanent. All 5 of these abilities are restored to Link's right arm across a shrine sequence early in the game. They're narratively framed as recovered ancient technology rather than learned skills. That's a deliberate choice. Tears of the Kingdom positions its abilities as archaeological discoveries, not personal growth. You're not becoming more powerful, You're uncovering systems that already existed, systems so advanced they reshape how you interact with every surface, every object, and every problem in the world. Taken together, these 5 powers are the most ambitious ability design in the series' history. They don't open specific doors, they give you a vocabulary for interacting with the entire physical world, and the game trusts you to write your own sentences. But even with all of this innovation in the mainline titles, there's a whole other category of Zelda abilities that most people completely overlook. The bigger picture. Here's the thing nobody tells you about Zelda's ability design. It has never, not once in over 35 years, given you a power that only makes Link better. Every single ability makes the world different, and that distinction matters more than you think. The hookshot doesn't make Link faster. It makes distance irrelevant. Stasis doesn't make Link stronger. It makes time a resource you can spend. Ascend doesn't give Link a jump. It makes ceilings optional. Magnesis doesn't give Link telekinesis. It makes every metal object in the world a potential bridge, weapon, or solution. Every ability in this franchise, from the original Power Bracelet in 1986 to Ultra Hand in 2023, follows the same core philosophy. Don't upgrade the player, reshape the world. And that's not an accident. That's a design language that has been refined across dozens of titles, hundreds of dungeons, and thousands of puzzles. The trajectory is a straight line if you know where to look. Items became tools. Tools became runes. Runes became systems. Each generation kept the philosophy and expanded the canvas. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even the oldest abilities in the series have mechanical depth that most players never touch. Speedrun communities have documented this more precisely than any casual playthrough ever could. Ocarina of Time's attack tables show that the same spin attack animation produces completely different damage outputs, depending on whether you quick spin, charge spin, or use a magic charged spin. A quick spin with the Master Sword deals 2 damage per rotation. A full magic charged spin deals 4. Same animation, same button input to the untrained eye, completely different mechanical result. That level of precision has been baked into the series since 1998, and most players have never noticed it exists. The recurring abilities prove this even further. The spin attack, the boomerang, bombs, the bow. These show up across nearly every title, not because Nintendo ran out of ideas. They show up because they're genuinely versatile design primitives. The spin attack in Ocarina of Time and the spin attack in Skyward Sword are the same idea expressed through completely different combat systems. One uses damage tables and magic meters. The other uses motion controls and directional slashing. Same concept, different argument about what combat should feel like. And that's exactly what makes Zelda's abilities endure, where other franchises cycle through gimmicks and forget them. Zelda never treats abilities as rewards for patience. It never hands you a new power and says, "Congratulations, you waited long enough." Every new ability is a statement. Here is something the world can do that it couldn't do before you arrived. Cryonis doesn't reward you for reaching a certain point in the game. It tells you that water is now a building material. Fuse doesn't reward you for collecting enough materials. It tells you that every object in the world has a second life as a weapon component. That's the real thread connecting the original Legend of Zelda to Tears of the Kingdom. It was never about giving Link more power. It was about giving the world more meaning. So the next time you pick up a hookshot, or place a Cryonis pillar on a river, or fuse a rock to a stick because you're out of options and it's the only thing that makes sense, remember something. You're not just using a game mechanic. You're participating in a design conversation that started in 1986 and is still going. Every ability you've ever used in this series was someone's argument about what a game world could be. And after 35 years, they're still winning that argument. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.